In a distant future, humanity had been cast out of the Milky Way. The galaxy that once cradled Earth and all its dreams was now forbidden. An ancient alliance of alien races, known as the Concord, had imposed this exile centuries ago. No one alive truly knew why. The stories passed down through generations spoke of punishment, but the details were hazy, like fragments of a half-forgotten dream. For most people, Earth was just a myth, a tale told to children before bed. Jacob Carter didn't believe in myths. He was a man who trusted facts and figures, not fairy tales. A skilled pilot with a knack for getting into trouble, Jacob spent his days working odd jobs on the fringes of civilized space. His latest assignment brought him to an old, crumbling space station orbiting the edge of nowhere. It was supposed to be a routine repair mission, fix a broken docking bay door, and collect his pay. But life rarely went according to plan for Jacob. While crawling through the station's dusty maintenance corridors, Jacob stumbled upon something unusual. A locked data core tucked away in a forgotten storage compartment. Most people would have left it alone, assuming it contained nothing more than outdated system logs. But Jacob wasn't most people. His curiosity got the better of him, and he pried open the casing with tools from his utility belt. What he found inside changed everything. The data core held classified information, encrypted files detailing coordinates and star maps. At first glance, they seemed random, but Jacob recognized patterns. These weren't just any coordinates. They pointed toward Earth, the mythical home of humanity, the place everyone said was lost forever. As Jacob scrolled through the files, his heart raced. There were warnings too, stark red alerts labeling Earth as restricted and highly dangerous. Yet none of that mattered. All Jacob could think about was the possibility of finding Earth, of proving it still existed. He knew he couldn't keep this discovery to himself. Jacob reached out to Emily Dawson, an old friend from his days as a cadet in flight school. Emily was smart, practical, and always willing to listen, even when Jacob's ideas bordered on reckless. She lived light years away, running a small repair shop on a mining colony, but she agreed to meet him at the station after hearing what he'd found. When Emily arrived, her reaction was predictable. "You're insane," she said flatly, crossing her arms as she studied the data on Jacob's tablet. Her dark hair was tied back in a loose ponytail, and her face showed both skepticism and concern. "Do you even realize what you're saying? If the Concorde catches wind of this, we'll be dead before we can blink." Jacob shrugged, his grin lopsided but confident. "Then we don't let them catch us." Emily sighed, shaking her head. Deep down, though, she felt a spark of excitement. She'd grown up hearing stories about Earth, just like everyone else. The idea of actually finding it, of uncovering the truth behind humanity's banishment, was intoxicating. Still, she tried to talk sense into him. "This isn't some treasure hunt, Jacob. This is serious. People have died for less." "I know," Jacob replied, his tone softening. "But don't you want to know? Don't you want to find out what really happened?" Before Emily could answer, the station's alarms blared, startling them both. Red lights flashed overhead, casting eerie shadows across the room. Someone, or something, had detected their unauthorized access to the data core. They didn't have much time. Grabbing the tablet, Jacob shoved it into his bag and motioned for Emily to follow him. As they sprinted down the corridor, dodging security drones and sealing bulkheads behind them, one thing became clear. Their lives were about to change forever. Whatever secrets Earth held, Jacob and Emily were determined to uncover them, even if it meant breaking every rule in the galaxy. After escaping the space station with their lives and the mysterious data core, Jacob and Emily found themselves sitting in a dimly lit cantina on a nearby mining outpost. The air was thick with the smell of grease and stale alcohol, and the hum of conversation filled the room. They sat at a corner table, hunched over Jacob's tablet as they pored over the star maps and coordinates. Emily tapped her fingers nervously on the table. "Even if we figure out where Earth is, How you plan to get there? You saw those warnings. The Concorde doesn't mess around. Jacob leaned back in his chair, his sharp features illuminated by the flickering glow of the tablet screen. We'll find a way. We always do. Emily rolled her eyes but couldn't hide the hint of admiration in her voice. You're impossible, you know that. Before Jacob could respond, a shadow fell across the table. Both of them looked up to see Rachel Morgan standing there, arms crossed and an eyebrow raised. Rachel was a navigator by trade, known for her sharp mind and sharper tongue. She had a reputation for getting ships and their crews out of tight spots. Jacob and Emily had worked with her once before, and while she wasn't exactly friendly, she was reliable. What are you two up to? Rachel asked, pulling out a chair without waiting for an invitation. Her piercing blue eyes darted between them. And don't bother lying. I saw you running out of that station like your tails were on fire. Jacob hesitated, glancing at Emily. She gave him a slight nod, and he sighed. All right, fine. We think we found something big. Something important. Rachel's expression didn't change. Important enough to risk your necks. Important enough to change everything, Jacob said, sliding the tablet toward her. Rachel studied the star maps, her brow furrowing as she pieced together what she was looking at. When realization dawned, her eyes widened slightly. Earth, she whispered, leaning closer. You're serious. As a heart attack, Jacob replied. Rachel sat back, letting out a low whistle. Wow, just wow. She shook her head, her blonde hair catching the light. You guys are either geniuses or complete idiots. Probably both, Emily muttered. Rachel tapped her chin thoughtfully. If you're planning to go after this, you'll need more than just the two of you. And you'll definitely need someone who knows how to navigate restricted space without getting blown to bits. Jacob grinned. Are you volunteering? I'm saying you'd be fools to try this without me. Rachel shot back, though there was a hint of a smile tugging at her lips. But we'll also need muscle, someone who can patch us up if things go south. That's when Daniel Hayes walked into the cantina, tall and broad-shouldered, with a quiet demeanor that made people underestimate him. Daniel was a medic by training but carried himself like a soldier. He had a haunted look in his dark eyes, the kind that came from carrying too many burdens. Jacob had crossed paths with him once during a transport mission, and despite Daniel's reserved nature, he'd proven himself trustworthy. Speak of the devil, Jacob murmured, waving Daniel over. The man approached cautiously, his gaze sweeping the room before settling on the group. What's this about? He asked, his voice low and steady. Jacob explained their discovery and their plan, or rather, the beginnings of one. To everyone's surprise, Daniel didn't immediately dismiss the idea. Instead, he listened intently, his expression unreadable. When Jacob finished, Daniel let out a slow breath. This isn't going to end well, he said finally. But I'm in. The others exchanged surprised glances. Emily broke the silence. Why? Daniel shrugged. Because someone has to make sure you don't get yourselves killed. Besides, he paused, his jaw tightening. I've got nothing left to lose. With their team assembled, the four of them began making preparations. They scoured the outpost for supplies, piecing together what they needed to retrofit an old smuggling vessel called the Wanderer Asterisk. It wasn't much to look at. Its hull was patched together with mismatched metal plates, and its engines groaned under the strain of even short flights. But it was all they could afford. More importantly, it was small and fast, perfect for slipping through enemy lines unnoticed. As they worked, tensions ran high. Each member of the group brought their own baggage, their own reasons for joining the mission. Jacob's determination bordered on recklessness, while Emily's cautious nature clashed with Rachel's no-nonsense attitude. Daniel kept mostly to himself, his presence a quiet reminder of the stakes they were facing. Despite their differences, they shared one thing in common: a burning desire to uncover the truth. Whatever secrets Earth held, they were willing to risk everything to find out. Little did they know, their journey would test them in ways none of them could have imagined. The crew of Asterisk, the Wanderer Asterisk, spent days preparing for their dangerous journey. The old smuggling vessel groaned and creaked as they loaded it with supplies, but Rachel assured them she'd done everything possible to make it spaceworthy. "This bucket of bolts won't win any beauty contests," she said, patting the control panel affectionately, "but it'll get us where we need to go, if we're lucky." Jacob stood near the cockpit, staring out at the vast expanse of stars. His mind raced with thoughts of Earth and what they might find there. Was it a paradise lost, a wasteland, or something far more complicated? Emily joined him, holding 2 mugs of steaming coffee. She handed one to Jacob without a word, sensing his unease. "You really think this is a good idea?" she asked after a moment, her voice soft but firm. Jacob took a sip of the bitter liquid before answering. "Do we have a choice? If we don't do this, who will?" Emily didn't respond right away. Instead, she glanced over her shoulder at Daniel, who was checking medical supplies in the cargo bay. He moved methodically, his focus unwavering. "I just hope we know what we're getting into," she said finally. Their first challenge came sooner than expected. Navigating to the edge of the Milky Way meant crossing through heavily guarded territory controlled by the Concorde. Rachel plotted a course that avoided major checkpoints, relying on outdated maps and blind spots in the defense grid. Still, no plan was foolproof. As Asterisk, the Wanderer Asterisk, approached the boundary, the tension aboard the ship grew palpable. Jacob sat in the pilot's seat, his hands gripping the controls tightly. Rachel monitored the sensors from the co-pilot's station, her eyes darting between screens. Behind them, Emily and Daniel braced themselves, ready for whatever might happen. "Here comes trouble," Rachel announced suddenly. On the radar, several red dots appeared, moving swiftly toward their position. Automated defense drones, programmed to destroy intruders, had detected their presence. "Hold steady," Jacob ordered, his voice calm despite the adrenaline coursing through him. He adjusted the ship's trajectory, weaving between asteroids and debris fields in an attempt to lose their pursuers. The drones fired warning shots, bright bursts of energy illuminating the darkness outside. Rachel worked quickly, rerouting power to the engines and disabling non-essential systems. "We can't outrun them forever," she warned. "I know," Jacob replied, his jaw clenched. "But maybe we don't have to." With Rachel's guidance, he guided Asterisk, the Wanderer Asterisk, into a narrow asteroid field, using the rocky formations as cover. The drones followed, their movements less precise in the tight quarters. One by one, they collided with the asteroids or overshot their targets, exploding in brilliant flashes of light. But the victory was short-lived. As they emerged on the other side of the field, a new threat appeared. A massive Concorde patrol ship loomed ahead, its weapons trained on Asterisk, the Wanderer Asterisk. Alarms blared inside the cockpit, and the ship shuddered under the force of a tractor beam trying to pull them in. "We're not going down like this," Jacob growled, pushing the engines to their limit. He banked hard to the left, narrowly avoiding a blast from the patrol ship. Rachel frantically scanned for weaknesses in the enemy vessel, her fingers flying across the console. "There," she shouted, pointing to a blinking icon on the screen. "If we hit their targeting array, we can disable the tractor beam." Jacob nodded, trusting her instincts. With precision born of years of piloting, he lined up the shot and fired. The impact sent a shockwave rippling through the patrol ship, momentarily disrupting its systems. Seizing the opportunity, Rachel activated a cloaking device they'd salvaged during their preparations. In an instant, Asterisk, the Wanderer Asterisk, vanished from sight. The crew held their breath as the patrol ship drifted past, its sensors unable to locate them. When it was clear they'd escaped detection, Jacob let out a shaky laugh. "That was too close." "Too close doesn't even begin to cover it," Emily muttered, sinking into a nearby chair. Her face was pale, but her relief was evident. Daniel entered the cockpit, his expression unreadable. "We made it through the boundary, he said simply. Now what? Jacob looked at the others, determination burning in his eyes. Now we find Earth. Once they crossed into the Milky Way, the crew of Asterisk, the Wanderer Asterisk, felt a mix of awe and unease. The galaxy looked different from the stories they'd heard. Its stars seemed dimmer, its silence heavier. It was as if the Milky Way itself didn't want them there. Jacob guided the ship cautiously, his eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of danger. Rachel monitored their position, cross-referencing it with the star maps on the data core. We're close, she said finally, breaking the quiet that had settled over the cockpit. If these coordinates are right, we should reach Earth's system within a few hours. Emily leaned forward in her seat, gripping the armrests tightly. And then what? Just land and knock on the door. No one said this would be easy, Jacob replied, though his tone lacked its usual confidence. Even he couldn't ignore the weight of what they were about to do. As they approached Earth's solar system, something strange caught Rachel's attention. There's interference ahead, she said, frowning at her screen. It's like static, but not natural. Someone, or something, is jamming our sensors. Could it be the Concorde? Daniel asked from the back of the cabin. He stood near the medical supplies, always ready for the worst. Rachel shook her head. Not unless they've upgraded their tech since the last time I checked. This feels older, alien. Jacob adjusted the ship's course, steering them toward the source of the interference. What they found left them speechless. A massive structure floated in the void, a ring-like object pulsating with an eerie blue light. It dwarfed even the largest Concorde ships, its surface covered in intricate patterns that seemed to shift and change as they watched. What is that thing? Emily whispered, her voice barely audible. I don't know, Jacob admitted, his hands hovering over the controls. But it's blocking our path to Earth. Before anyone could suggest a plan, alarms blared inside the ship. A swarm of small, insect-like drones emerged from the ring, surrounding Asterisk, the Wanderer Asterisk. Their movements were erratic, almost curious, but the threat was undeniable. They're scanning us, Rachel said, her fingers flying across the console. I'm trying to block their signals, but it's like they're learning as they go. Can we fight them off? Daniel asked, grabbing a handheld weapon from the storage locker. Jacob shook his head. We're outnumbered. Our best bet is to evade and find another way around. With Rachel feeding him real-time data, Jacob maneuvered the ship through the swarm, narrowly avoiding collisions. The drones followed relentlessly, firing bursts of energy that rattled the hull. Each hit made the crew flinch, their nerves stretched thin. Finally, Jacob spotted an opening, a gap between two clusters of drones. Hold on, he shouted, pushing the engines to their limit. The ship surged forward, leaving the swarm behind. When they emerged on the other side, the crew let out a collective sigh of relief. But their respite was short-lived. Ahead of them, Earth loomed large, a pale blue dot surrounded by swirling clouds. Yet something was off. The planet appeared darker than expected, its surface obscured by patches of shadow. There's no response from the surface, Rachel reported, her voice tinged with worry. No communication towers, no satellites. Nothing. Maybe whoever's left doesn't want visitors, Emily suggested, though her words sounded hollow even to her. Jacob brought the ship closer, searching for a safe place to land. His gaze lingered on the planet below, half expecting to see signs of life. Instead, all he saw were ruins, crumbling cities and barren landscapes, stretching as far as the eye could see. We'll have to set down here, he said, pointing to a desolate area near what looked like an abandoned settlement. Let's hope we can find some answers. As Asterisk, the Wanderer Asterisk, descended, the crew exchanged uneasy glances. None of them spoke, but their thoughts were the same. What had happened to Earth? And more importantly, what had humanity done to deserve exile? Whatever truths lay ahead, they knew one thing for certain. They were about to uncover secrets better left buried. The landing was rough, jolting everyone inside the Wanderer as the ship touched down on uneven ground. Dust kicked up around them, swirling in the weak sunlight that filtered through a thick layer of clouds. Jacob powered down the engines and glanced at the others. "Stay sharp," he said, grabbing a flashlight and a small toolkit. "We don't know what's out here." The airlock hissed open, and the crew stepped onto the surface of Earth. The landscape was bleak. Cracked soil stretched for miles, dotted with twisted metal structures that once might have been buildings. A cold wind whipped through the area, carrying with it an eerie silence. It wasn't just quiet. It felt empty, as if the planet itself had given up. Rachel adjusted her breathing mask and scanned the horizon with a handheld device. "No signs of life," she reported. "But there are faint energy readings coming from that direction." She pointed toward a cluster of ruins in the distance. "Could be power lines or generators," Emily suggested, her voice muffled by her mask. "If we're lucky, we'll find something useful." Daniel stayed close to the group, his hand resting on the grip of his weapon. He didn't say much, but his sharp eyes darted constantly, taking in every detail. Something about this place made him uneasy, though he couldn't put his finger on why. As they moved closer to the ruins, the crew began noticing strange markings etched into the walls of the crumbling buildings. They looked like symbols, too precise to be natural. Jacob ran his fingers over one of them, frowning. "These weren't made by humans," he said quietly. "At least, not recently." Emily nodded, snapping photos of the markings with her tablet. Maybe whoever, or whatever, was here left behind clues. They pressed on, following the energy readings Rachel's device picked up. The deeper they went into the ruins, the stranger things became. The air grew colder, and the shadows seemed to stretch longer than they should. Then, without warning, Jacob stopped dead in his tracks. "Do you hear that?" he asked, tilting his head. At first, no one else heard anything. But then, faintly, a sound reached their ears. A low hum, almost musical, coming from somewhere ahead. It wasn't mechanical or natural. It was something entirely different, sending chills down their spines. "That can't be good," Rachel muttered, gripping her scanner tighter. Against their better judgment, they followed the sound. It led them to a large structure, partially buried beneath layers of dirt and debris. Its entrance was blocked by a heavy metal door, rusted but still intact. Jacob examined it closely, finding a keypad embedded in the wall nearby. Most of the buttons were worn away, but a few faint outlines remained. "Think you can crack it?" Emily asked, stepping back to let him work. Jacob smirked despite the tension. "I've hacked tougher systems than this." He pulled out his toolkit and got to work, his fingers moving quickly. After a few tense minutes, the door groaned open, revealing a dark passageway beyond. Inside, the air smelled stale, like nothing had disturbed it for centuries. Flickering lights lined the walls, casting eerie shadows as the group ventured deeper. The humming grew louder, resonating through the corridor like a heartbeat. At the end of the passage, they found a massive chamber filled with strange machinery. In the center stood a pedestal, glowing faintly with the same blue light they had seen from the ring in space. "What is this place?" Emily whispered, her voice trembling. Before anyone could answer, the pedestal flared brighter, and images began projecting onto the walls. Scenes of Earth's past played out before their eyes. Humans building cities, exploring space, discovering advanced technology. But then the images shifted, showing destruction and chaos. People screamed as skies turned black, oceans boiled, and entire continents crumbled. Rachel backed away, shaking her head. This is why the Concord banned us. We destroyed ourselves. But why keep it hidden?" Daniel asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Why exile us instead of helping?" Jacob stared at the pedestal, his mind racing. Whatever this place was, it held answers, not just about Earth, but about humanity itself. And deep down, He knew they were only scratching the surface. The crew stood frozen, their eyes glued to the projections on the walls. The images shifted again, showing humans working alongside alien figures, manipulating strange technology that pulsed with an otherworldly energy. At the center of it all was a massive structure buried deep beneath Earth's surface, a glowing core surrounded by intricate machinery. It looked like the heart of something ancient and powerful. Jacob stepped closer to the pedestal, his curiosity overriding caution. "This has to be what the Concorde was trying to protect," he said, his voice low but steady. "Whatever this thing is, it's not just dangerous, it's alive." Emily grabbed his arm, pulling him back. "Are you insane? We don't know what will happen if you touch it." Before Jacob could respond, the ground trembled beneath their feet. A loud rumble echoed through the chamber, followed by a sharp crackling sound. The glowing core from the projections began to materialize in the air above the pedestal, its light growing brighter with each passing second. "What's happening?" Rachel shouted, shielding her eyes from the glare. Daniel moved closer to the group, his weapon drawn. "We need to leave. Now." But it was too late. The core stabilized, hovering silently in the air. Then, without warning, it released a wave of energy that knocked everyone off their feet. When they opened their eyes, they found themselves no longer alone. Standing before them were three figures, tall, slender beings with translucent skin and glowing eyes. They didn't speak, but their presence filled the room with an overwhelming sense of authority. One of them raised a hand, and the images on the walls vanished, replaced by a single word written in glowing letters. *Nexus*. Rachel gasped. That's what the survivors called it, the ancient force buried under Earth. The beings turned their gaze toward the crew, studying them intently. Though they made no sound, Jacob felt as though their voices were inside his head, speaking directly to him. *You have awakened the Nexus. Its power cannot be contained. Jacob shook his head, struggling to form words. "We didn't mean to. We just wanted answers." The tallest of the beings stepped forward, its movements fluid and deliberate. Answers come at a cost. The Concorde sought to shield your kind from destruction, yet here you stand, risking everything for knowledge. Emily stepped forward, her voice trembling but firm. "If humanity caused this mess, then we deserve to fix it. Tell us how to stop it." The being tilted its head, as if considering her words. For a moment, silence filled the chamber. Then the light around the Nexus dimmed slightly, and the beings began to fade, their forms dissolving into thin air. Before disappearing completely, one of them spoke again, its voice echoing in their minds. "The choice is yours. But beware, the Nexus obeys no master. When the beings were gone, the crew sat in stunned silence, the weight of the encounter sinking in. Jacob broke the quiet first. "Well, that was terrifying." "And enlightening," Emily added, her tone grim. "They weren't lying about the danger. This thing, it's beyond anything we've ever seen." Rachel checked her scanner, her expression tense. "We're not alone anymore. I'm picking up multiple signals. Concorde ships, heading straight for us." "How much time do we have?" Daniel asked, already moving toward the exit. "Not enough," Rachel replied, her voice tight. "Minutes, maybe less." Jacob clenched his fists, his mind racing. "We can't leave now. Not without figuring out what this Nexus does, or how to control it." "And what happens if we fail?" Emily shot back. "Do you want to end up like the last people who tried?" Jacob hesitated, torn between fear and determination. Finally, he nodded. "Then we split up. Rachel, get back to the ship and prep for takeoff. Daniel, cover her. Emily, you're with me. We'll stay here and see if we can stabilize the Nexus." No one argued. There wasn't time. As Rachel and Daniel sprinted down the corridor, Jacob and Emily turned their attention back to the pedestal. The glowing core pulsed rhythmically, almost like it was breathing. Jacob reached out cautiously, his fingers brushing against its surface. The moment he touched it, visions flooded his mind. Images of Earth restored, thriving cities, and lush forests. But behind those hopeful scenes lurked darker possibilities: fire, ash, and endless destruction. He pulled his hand away, breathing heavily. "We're playing with forces we don't understand," Emily said, her voice barely audible. "I know," Jacob replied, his jaw set. "But if we don't try, we'll never know what could have been." As the distant roar of Concorde ships grew louder, the two worked quickly, hoping against hope that they could prevent another catastrophe and save what little remained of humanity's legacy. Rachel and Daniel sprinted through the ruins, their boots crunching against the cracked earth. The distant hum of Concorde ships grew louder with each passing second, a grim reminder that time was running out. Rachel glanced over her shoulder, her face pale under the dim light of Earth's sun. "We're not going to make it back in time," she panted. Daniel didn't respond. His focus was on keeping them moving, his weapon drawn as he scanned the horizon for threats. He knew the odds were stacked against them, but giving up wasn't an option. "Keep running," he said finally, his voice firm. "Jacob and Emily are counting on us." Back in the chamber, Jacob and Emily worked frantically to stabilize the Nexus. The glowing core pulsed erratically, its energy surging in unpredictable bursts. Every time Jacob adjusted the controls on the pedestal, the machine responded with a deafening crackle, sending sparks flying into the air. "This isn't working," Emily shouted, ducking to avoid a shower of hot embers. Her hands trembled as she fiddled with the settings, trying to find a pattern in the chaos. "If we don't figure this out soon, the whole thing could collapse and take us with it." Jacob wiped sweat from his brow, his mind racing. "There has to be a way to sync with it. Maybe if we mimic its frequency." Emily shook her head, frustration bubbling over. "And how exactly do you plan to do that? We don't even know what kind of tech this is." Before Jacob could answer, the ground shook violently, nearly knocking them off their feet. A deep rumble echoed through the chamber, followed by the sound of collapsing tunnels somewhere above them. Dust rained down from the ceiling, choking the already stale air. "They're here," Jacob muttered, glancing toward the entrance. Sure enough, the faint glow of Concorde lights appeared in the distance, growing brighter with each passing moment. "We can't hold them off," Emily said, her voice breaking. "Even if we stabilize the Nexus, they'll destroy us before we can escape." Jacob hesitated, his gaze fixed on the glowing core. For a brief moment, he considered abandoning the mission and making a run for it. But something inside him refused to give up, not when they were so close to uncovering the truth. "We have one shot," he said finally, his tone resolute. "We overload the system, force it to reset. It might buy us enough time to get out." Emily stared at him, her eyes wide with fear. "You mean blow it up?" "Not completely," Jacob replied quickly. "Just enough to knock it offline. If we're lucky, it'll reboot itself and stabilize." "And if we're not lucky?" Emily asked, though she already knew the answer. Jacob didn't respond. Instead, he began rerouting power from the pedestal to the core, his hands moving with practiced precision. Emily joined him, her earlier hesitation replaced by grim determination. Together, they worked in silence, the only sounds the hum of the Nexus and the approaching footsteps of the Concorde soldiers. Meanwhile, Rachel and Daniel reached the Wanderer Asterisk, their lungs burning from the exertion. Rachel scrambled aboard, her fingers flying across the console as she powered up the ship. Daniel stood guard outside, his weapon trained on the edge of the clearing. The first wave of Concorde troops appeared moments later, their armored forms cutting through the haze like shadows. "Rachel, we've got company," Daniel called, firing a warning shot to keep the soldiers at bay. "I'm almost ready," Rachel shouted back, her voice strained. She punched in the final sequence, and the engines roared to life. "Get aboard." Daniel hesitated, glancing toward the ruins where Jacob and Emily were still trapped. He wanted to go back for them, but he knew there wasn't time. With a heavy heart, he leaped onto the ship just as the first volley of enemy fire struck the hull. Inside the chamber, Jacob and Emily finished their adjustments. The Nexus shuddered violently, its light flickering as the system struggled to cope with the sudden surge of energy. "That's it," Jacob yelled, grabbing Emily's hand. "Let's move." They ran as fast as they could, the walls crumbling around them. Behind them, the Nexus let out a final, ear-splitting roar before collapsing into darkness. The shockwave knocked them off their feet, but they scrambled back up, pushing forward despite the pain. When they finally reached the surface, the Wanderer was waiting, its ramp lowered and engines idling. Rachel leaned out of the cockpit, shouting for them to hurry. Jacob and Emily didn't need to be told twice. They sprinted toward the ship, diving inside just as the Concorde forces arrived. "Go," Jacob shouted, slamming the ramp control. Rachel didn't hesitate. She yanked the throttle, and the Wanderer shot into the sky, leaving the ruins and the Concorde behind. As they broke through Earth's atmosphere, the crew collapsed into their seats, exhausted but alive. The crew of the Wanderer sat in stunned silence as the ship hurtled away from Earth. The adrenaline that had fueled their escape was beginning to wear off, leaving behind a heavy exhaustion and an even heavier sense of dread. Jacob leaned against the cockpit wall, his face pale and streaked with dirt. Emily sat beside him, her hands trembling as she stared at the floor. Rachel kept her eyes fixed on the controls, guiding the ship toward open space, while Daniel stood near the viewport, watching the planet shrink into the distance. "What did we just do?" Emily finally whispered, breaking the quiet. Her voice was barely audible, but it carried the weight of everything they'd seen and done. Jacob ran a hand through his hair, his expression grim. "We bought ourselves some time. That's all." "But at what cost?" Emily pressed, her tone sharper now. "That thing, the Nexus, it didn't feel like something we should have messed with." "No," Daniel agreed, turning to face them. His dark eyes were haunted, reflecting the same unease they all felt. "But it's done. We can't undo it." Rachel glanced over her shoulder, her lips pressed into a thin line. "Right now, we need to focus on staying alive. The Concorde isn't going to let us go easily, not after what happened down there." As if on cue, the ship's sensors began to blare. A swarm of Concorde vessels appeared on the radar, closing in fast. Rachel cursed under her breath, her fingers flying across the console as she plotted an evasive course. "Hold on," she warned, pushing the engines to their limit. The ship jolted violently as enemy fire struck the hull, sending sparks flying through the cabin. Jacob grabbed onto a nearby seat to steady himself, his heart pounding. "Can we outrun them?" "Not unless you've got another miracle up your sleeve," Rachel shot back, her voice tense. Jacob clenched his fists, frustration bubbling over. He knew they couldn't keep running forever. Sooner or later, the Concorde would catch up. And when they did, none of them expected mercy. "We need to disable their lead ship," Daniel said suddenly, his voice calm but firm. "If we take out their command center, the rest will scatter." "How do you propose we do that?" Emily asked, her skepticism evident. Daniel pointed to a blinking icon on the radar screen. "There, a weak point in their formation. If we hit it hard enough, we can create a diversion." Jacob nodded, making a quick decision. "Rachel, get us close. Emily, prep the weapons system. Daniel and I will handle the targeting." Without hesitation, the crew sprang into action. Rachel maneuvered the Wanderer with precision, weaving through the chaos of enemy fire. Emily worked frantically at the weapons console, her hands shaking but determined. Jacob and Daniel coordinated their efforts, calculating angles and timing their shots perfectly. When they reached the weak point, Rachel shouted, "Now!" Jacob fired the main cannon, sending a concentrated blast straight into the flank of the lead Concorde vessel. The impact was devastating, tearing through its shields and crippling its engines. The other ships faltered, their formation breaking apart as they scrambled to regroup. "Yes," Rachel exclaimed, punching the throttle. "Let's get out of here while they're distracted." As the Wanderer sped away, the crew allowed themselves a brief moment of relief. But the victory was short-lived. The damage to their ship was severe. Smoke filled the cabin, and several systems were failing. They needed repairs, and they needed them fast. "We can't stay in this sector," Daniel said, checking the medical supplies. "If the Concorde sends reinforcements, we're finished." "There's a derelict station not far from here," Rachel suggested, pulling up a map on her screen. "It's abandoned, but it might have what we need to patch up the ship." Jacob nodded, his jaw tight. "Then that's where we're headed." As they limped toward the station, the reality of their situation began to sink in. They had survived, for now, but the Nexus loomed large in their minds. Whatever they had awakened, it wasn't done with them yet. And deep down, they all knew that the choices they made next would shape not only their fates, but possibly the fate of humanity itself. The derelict station loomed ahead, a skeletal structure floating in the void. Its surface was pockmarked with craters and scars from battles long past, its once bright lights now dim or extinguished entirely. Rachel guided the Wanderer into one of the docking bays, her hand steady despite the ship's groaning protests. When they finally touched down, the crew sat in silence for a moment, letting the weight of their situation settle over them. "We're not safe here," Daniel said, breaking the quiet. His voice was low but carried an edge of urgency. "If the Concorde tracks us, this place will be crawling with soldiers before we know it." Jacob unbuckled his harness and stood, grabbing a toolkit from under his seat. "Then we work fast. Emily, you're with me. We'll check the power systems and see if we can get the station's repair bay online. Rachel, stay here and keep an eye on the radar. If anything shows up, you let us know." Emily nodded, already heading toward the airlock. She grabbed a flashlight from the supply cabinet, her movements quick but deliberate. The two stepped out onto the station's docking platform, their boots echoing against the cold metal floor. The air smelled stale, like nothing had disturbed it for decades. As they made their way deeper into the station, Jacob couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't alone. Shadows seemed to shift just out of sight, and every creak of the aging structure set his nerves on edge. "You hear that?" he asked suddenly, stopping in his tracks. Emily froze, listening intently. At first, there was nothing but the hum of distant machinery. Then, faintly, came the sound of footsteps. Slow, deliberate, and far too close for comfort. "Someone's here," Emily whispered, clutching her flashlight tighter. Before Jacob could respond, a figure emerged from the darkness. It wasn't human, at least not entirely. Its body was covered in patches of synthetic skin, blending flesh and machine in ways that made Jacob's stomach churn. The creature tilted its head, studying them with glowing eyes. "You shouldn't have come back," it rasped, its voice distorted and mechanical. Jacob raised his hand slowly, trying to appear non-threatening. "We don't mean any harm. We just need supplies to fix our ship." The creature didn't move. Instead, it cocked its head again, as if processing his words. Finally, it stepped aside, gesturing for them to follow. "Hurry," it said simply. "Time is short." Confused but with no other options, Jacob and Emily followed the creature through a maze of corridors until they reached a large chamber filled with tools and spare parts. The repair bay was old but functional, its consoles flickering to life as the creature activated them. "Who, or what, are you?" Emily asked, unable to contain her curiosity. "I am what remains of those who stayed behind," the creature replied cryptically. "When the Concorde exiled humanity, some refused to leave. This station became our refuge and our prison." Jacob frowned, piecing together the fragments of the story. Why didn't the Concorde destroy this place? "They knew we posed no threat," the creature said, its voice tinged with bitterness. And they knew we would die eventually, alone and forgotten. Emily exchanged a glance with Jacob, both of them sensing the weight of the creature's words. They worked quickly, gathering what they needed to repair the Wanderer *. As they did, the creature watched them silently, its glowing eyes unreadable. Back on the ship, Rachel's voice crackled over the comm. "We've got company. 2 Concorde ships, closing fast." Daniel tightened his grip on his weapon. "How much longer?" 5 minutes, Jacob replied, his tone clipped. "Maybe less." The crew scrambled to finish the repairs, their movements frantic but precise. Just as the last panel was secured, the station shuddered violently. The Concorde had arrived. "We need to go," Rachel shouted from the cockpit. Jacob hesitated, glancing at the creature one last time. "Come with us," he said. "You don't have to stay here." The creature shook its head, its expression unreadable. "This is where I belong. Go, save yourselves." Without another word, Jacob turned and ran back to the ship. As the Wanderer launched into space, the station erupted in flames behind them, consumed by the Concorde's attack. No one spoke as they fled into the darkness. The image of the creature burned into their minds. Whatever lay ahead, they knew one thing for certain. They were running out of time. And the Nexus was still waiting. Weeks passed after their narrow escape from the derelict station, but the crew of the Wanderer found little peace. The ship limped through uncharted space, its systems patched together with makeshift repairs. Each day brought new challenges, failing engines, dwindling supplies, and the constant threat of Concorde patrols. Yet the biggest burden they carried wasn't physical. It was the weight of what they'd seen and done. Jacob sat in the cockpit, staring out at the endless expanse of stars. His mind replayed the events on Earth over and over. The glowing Nexus, the alien beings, the crumbling ruins. He couldn't shake the feeling that they'd only scratched the surface of something far greater and far more dangerous. "Do you think we made the right choice?" he asked suddenly, breaking the silence. Emily, who had been sitting nearby tinkering with a broken console, looked up. Her expression was thoughtful but heavy. "I don't know," she admitted. "We stopped the Nexus from collapsing. But did we really fix anything? Or just delay the inevitable?" Rachel, seated at the navigation panel, glanced back at them. "Maybe there's no such thing as fixing it," she said quietly. "Some things are too big for us to handle. Maybe all we can do is survive." Daniel leaned against the wall, his arms crossed. He hadn't spoken much since their encounter with the creature on the station, but his silence spoke volumes. Finally, he said, "Surviving isn't enough. If we don't figure out how to stop the Nexus, or whatever's behind it, we're just postponing the problem for someone else to deal with." Jacob sighed, rubbing his temples. "And how exactly do we do that? We barely escaped with our lives last time." "We go back," Daniel replied firmly. His voice was steady, though his hands tightened around his arms. "Not now, maybe not even soon. But eventually, we'll have to face it again. Running won't solve anything." For a moment, no one responded. The idea of returning to Earth, or worse, confronting the Nexus, was almost too much to consider. But deep down, they all knew Daniel was right. They couldn't keep running forever. As the days turned into weeks, the crew began piecing together fragments of information from the data core they'd salvage. Rachel worked tirelessly, decrypting files and cross-referencing star maps. One night, she called everyone to the cockpit, her face pale but resolute. "I think I found something," she said, pointing to a series of coordinates on her screen. "It's another structure, similar to the one on Earth. If these readings are correct, it might hold answers about the Nexus." "Another death trap, you mean?" Emily muttered, though her curiosity was evident. "It's a risk," Jacob acknowledged. "But if we want to understand what we're dealing with, we don't have a choice." They agreed to set a course for the coordinates, knowing full well the dangers ahead. Along the way, tensions flared as exhaustion and fear took their toll. Arguments broke out over minor decisions, and moments of laughter were few and far between. Still, they stuck together, bound by a shared purpose and a shared guilt. When they finally reached the location, they found themselves staring at a massive artifact floating in the void. It pulsed faintly with the same blue light as the Nexus, its surface etched with symbols that seemed to shift and change. As they approached, the ship's sensors picked up a signal, a single word repeated endlessly. Asterisk, remember asterisk. What does it mean? Emily whispered, her voice trembling. Jacob shook his head. I don't know, but I think it's time we find out. As they prepared to board the artifact, each member of the crew felt a mix of fear and resolve. Whatever awaited them inside, they knew it would change everything, for better or worse. They had come too far to turn back now. In the end, their journey wasn't about finding Earth or uncovering humanity's past. It was about redemption for themselves, for their species, and for the mistakes that had led them here. Whether they succeeded or failed, one thing was certain. They would never forget what they had learned, and maybe, just maybe, that would be enough.